When you think about generation, we're doing great. It's 25% cheaper today on an inflation-adjusted basis than it was in 2010. At this moment, how do we get more out of the stuff that we've already paid for?
What feels different today from where you stand now versus your time that ended in January?
The Department of Energy today is not providing the leadership that we provided when we were there.
We need more power. We need more power for electrification, for data centers, for hyperscalers, for all of this AI that we're excited to use. What's your perspective on the big demand problem right now?
I don't think that the general audience, even people in our industry, actually understand. One of the big challenges that we have is that
Hey there, and welcome to Power Perspectives. You are about to hear a truly insightful conversation with one of the biggest names in our industry, Jigar Shah, former director of the DOE's Loan Programs Office and serial energy entrepreneur. But before we roll the tape on my conversation with Jigger, one that touched on the ways funding determines the future of energy innovation, the reality of how loans are distributed under Trump 2.0, and the one thing we keep getting wrong about solutions to our collective demand spike problem, I want to introduce myself. I'm a newish voice for a lot of you. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, head of content here at Energy Central, and the new host of Power Perspectives. I've got a long resume in all kinds of journalism and digital media and startups. I've been described by several bosses and teachers and friends as wonky. I love asking people questions. I love data. I love hearing passionate innovators talk about why they do what they do. But what's most important for the two of us here? I am so excited about the future of energy. That hype is really only outdone by my excitement for the chance to talk to the people determining what that shared future looks like. We are all power hungry, but we've got so many smart people joining our show to tell us how we meet this moment. The future of energy is bright, and so is the future of Power Perspectives. I'm thrilled to bring you some really cool conversations in the coming weeks and months. You're going to hear from people like Jigar Shah today, also renowned energy analyst Nat Bullard, the CEOs and COOs of some of the biggest utilities in the country, experts on things like capacity markets and local transmission, and so much more. I do have one ask for you, though. If you want to hear from someone, tell us. Matt and I are standing by, ready to chase down some big guests. You can email me anytime with ideas or suggestions at kinsey@smoothmedia.co. Once again, my email is kinsey, Kinsey, at smoothmedia.co. And that's just co, not .com. Don't forget to subscribe to Energy Central wherever you're listening in. Send our episodes to friends and coworkers and get excited about what's to come. We've got momentum on our side in this industry. And I, for one, cannot wait to see how these wildly intelligent and successful people behind our mics are going to put it all to good use. So now, without further ado, let's roll the interview with Jigar Shah. Enjoy. So Jigger Shaw is certainly a name many of our listeners will recognize. But Jigger, if you don't mind, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Jigar Shah. I've been working in the clean energy sector for over 25 years, starting my career at BP Solar, but then after that, starting a company called Sun Edison, which I sold in 2009, and is credited for popularizing the power purchase agreement. And then joined Richard Branson to found the Carbon War Room, which we merged into the Rocky Mountain Institute, and they've continued to do fantastic work. And then started Generate Capital, which is today the leading provider of capital to next generation ideas. And then most recently served in the Department of Energy, running the Loan Programs Office. And so super excited about that service. But all along the way, I've just been a huge fan of commercializing technology and figuring out how to make all these solutions affordable.
Figuring out how to make these solutions affordable is no small task. You say it so casually, like it is your everyday, but it is certainly a tall order. And today we're going to talk a lot specifically about your time at the LPO at the Loan Programs Office. I want to just give a quick run through for anybody who is not, keeping tabs at home here. You were the director of the LPO from March 2021 to January 2025. You approved over $107 billion of loan authority with another $300 billion of applications received for processing. Gonna need to take a breath here. The LPO more than tripled its staff under your leadership following the passing of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. The funds to the LPO increased tenfold from $40 billion to $400 billion. A lot of stuff going on during your tenure at the LPO. If you had to describe that tenure in one word, what would it be? Busy?
Inspiring.
Inspiring is great.
There has been a big uptick in investment into clean tech companies since 2017. And so when we got into office in 2021, there were a lot of companies that were ready to swing for the fences, and we were there to help them, right? I mean, and that is inspiring, right? Because I mean, the thing about the government is that we can't want something more than the private sector wants it, right? That's how people get into trouble. But what we can do is help people who have big dreams make them come true. And that was pretty inspiring.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up this idea of listening to what the market dictates, what people want. The government can't necessarily lead that horse to water. The LPO is obviously important for, a lot of reasons. One of the biggest being supporting this next gen kind of technology that might be too risky for Wall Street or have a different kind of return structure than venture capital is used to. But another thing I think that a lot of people perceive when we think about the LPO is signals. It's interesting to hear that you kind of take signals from market, but I think there's also a reputation for the LPO that you signal to the market where innovation is headed, where the industry might be headed. Can you walk me through a little bit how that works? What kind of signals can loan activity provide about this current state or the future direction of the energy industry?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that is obviously more art than science, right? I mean, so you start with saying we're equally enthusiastic about all 20 sectors that qualify for the Loan Programs Office, right? Whether it's clean steel and clean cement or whether it's new nuclear, new geothermal, right? We're equally enthusiastic about all of it. But then you look at who shows up. And sometimes the people that you're enthusiastic about don't show up, right? They don't have a loan application in front of you. So no matter how much I want to help that industry, if they don't apply for loans, right, then I can't help them. And then even after they apply for loans, sometimes they're not ready, right? So a lot of the virtual power plant applications that we received took over a year of coaching to get those folks to a place where they actually met our standard, right? So we were really good at describing our standard, right? A reasonable prospect of repayment, but a lot of people didn't meet it. And so we said, sorry, we can't process you until you meet it. And so, a good example is nuclear power, which, I think there's been a lot of headlines about. But when we were in office, they were a train wreck. The entire industry had no idea what it was doing, right? And we were in the middle of getting Vogel completed. And so we engaged in a big way. We finally got Holtec to agree to restart the Palisades nuclear plant, which they were not interested in doing. And then they did that, and then we had to rewrite the rules at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission because we had never turned back on a nuclear reactor in the United States history, so the rule set had to be created. But we also got, the other 2 plants to turn back on, right? So 3 Mile Island, and now you saw Dwayne Arnold, agree that they wanted to turn back on. And we got a whole bunch of people, the rules necessary to build a new nuclear plant, and so now you see a bunch of those projects starting to get announced, which I'm so proud to see. We didn't have as much success in, for instance, the clean hydrogen sector or in some of the sectors that are around like clean steel or clean cement, not because we didn't try, but because, they didn't show up to the game.
It's interesting to square that with this idea that the LPO is an entity that might have priorities. A lot of it seems like what your job entailed is waiting for industry to get to the point where you can say, okay, now go forth and prosper, right? I'm curious whether that's true. Does the loan programs office have its own priorities? Are there certain industries that might get priority? How does that work, and how do those priorities shift from administration to administration? It seems like the LPO today is different from that under your leadership. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that works?
Well, we certainly didn't have priorities in terms of favorites while I was in the loan programs office. We really did love all of our applicants equally. But you could imagine that there were some areas where we staffed up business development more than other areas, right? So we certainly had a larger team on virtual power plants. We had a larger team on tribal energy loans. We had a larger team on getting electric utilities to use the 1706 Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, right? And so there's some areas where we actually had additional people that were making additional outreach phone calls to say, hey, just wanted to tell you that this program is here for you. and you should use it, right? And so there's some of that that obviously you do, and this administration clearly has pivoted to, other sectors that they want to try to attract applicants into, which I think is wonderful. But I do think it's important for all American innovators and entrepreneurs to feel like if they wanted to use the office, that they would get a fair shake.
Yeah, that makes, a good amount of sense, and I think it's I imagine a big challenge of the job is ensuring that you can make contact with those potential innovators, and we'll talk a little bit more in this conversation, I imagine, too, about who those innovators are, where it's exciting, where there feels like there's a lot of momentum right now. I'm curious, though, just before we get into some of those more specifics about the problems being solved today by those innovators. How would you characterize today's LPO versus the one that you led? I'm obviously it's different teams, different structures. They love all their innovators the same, right? But what feels different today from where you stand now versus your time that ended in January?
Well, there clearly was a lot of excitement and enthusiasm while I was running the loan programs office. I mean, you had 300 plus $1 billion of applications that came in that we had yet to process, right? And those were from everything from electric utility companies to, large corporates, right? From the oil and gas industry to innovators and entrepreneurs, right? So we had the full gamut. We had, a group that owned 4 refineries that came in and they wanted to like refab all those refineries, right? Which I think is fantastic. I think this current LPO is still trying to find its footing, right? So it's on its third LPO director in just like 8 months. And I think that they still have yet to speak to the potential audience of people that they want to attract applicants from. And so I think they're still trying to sort through all the work that we had done and left for them and, figure out which deals they want to honor and which deals they don't want to honor. And, like figure out where their permission is coming from the Secretary of Energy or the President of the United States. And so I think they're having a really hard time communicating to the general public because they're waiting for instructions themselves from their bosses. And so I'm hopeful that they get those instructions soon and provide clarity to the market.
Yeah, and it seems, not to over dramatize all of this, but it does seem that time is of the essence. When I go out and speak to people in this industry, there is a common theme, and I'm sure this is not going to come as a surprise to you or anybody listening to this about this demand problem, this idea of a generational problem. There is going to be more demand than there is supply, or there is going to be more demand than there is energy that we can get to the right entities at the right time. This isn't new, but I do feel it has gotten, more pronounced, I imagine, since you started in 2021 at the LPO. There are obviously many elements involved in figuring this out and sort of thinking our way out of this problem, in investing our way out of this problem. And I want to get your perspective on it. So if it's cool with you, we'll kind of go through the different elements of this demand headache dilemma, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. But I think we start with the basics. This is a hunger for power. We need more power. We need more power for electrification, for data centers, for hyperscalers, for all of this AI that we're also excited to use. But at the highest level, in the biggest picture, I'm curious to hear how you sort of view this challenge when you're trying to sum it up or to figure out what the most important questions are to ask. What's your perspective on demand, the big demand problem right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, and your intro, I think, was quite good here because I think one of the big challenges that we have is that we're not defining the problem well, and the Department of Energy today is not providing the leadership that we provided when we were there, right? So, like for instance, as you know, we have a peak demand in this country of 840 gigawatts or so, right? We have an average demand in this country of roughly 460 gigawatts, right? And so, in general, we have so much excess capacity in our existing electricity system, right? We have so much generating capacity. We probably have at any given time over 1,000 gigawatts of available electricity capacity. So we're really not short electricity capacity, but the entire conversation is about generation, right? And when you think about generation, we're doing great, right? Generation is 25% cheaper today on an inflation adjusted basis than it was in 2010, right? So like we have actually bent the curve and generation has never been cheaper than it is today, right? On like an aggregate basis. The problem as you suggested in your intro is getting it to the load is actually where the bottleneck is, right? The transmission capacity has never been used less. We're at 55% capacity utilization of transmission. Our distribution system is even worse, right? It's at 20% average utilization, right? And so we've way overbuilt transmission and distribution. And you see this in all the states where we have expensive electricity. Wholesale market generation costs are about 20% of your entire bill, and 80% of your bill now is transmission and distribution, right? And then other miscellaneous costs, right? So the question really becomes, at this moment, how do we get more out of the stuff that we've already paid for? And the answer to that is always batteries. And we had a whole AI load primer when we were there, which this administration has left up. We also have the virtual power plant liftoff report, the grid enhancing technology liftoff report. But I don't think that the general audience, even people in our industry, actually understand that building more solar and wind farms in places that then need upgraded transmission and upgraded distribution, like, is not the fastest way to meet this load growth, right? The fastest way to meet this load growth is to put a bunch of batteries in people's homes, in people's businesses, putting them at the substation, right? So that they can actually provide capacity at the distribution circuit level, right? And you see that with the distributed capacity procurement model that Spark Fund signed with Xcel Minnesota. You see that with the business model that Base Power is pursuing with the backing of Andreessen Horowitz. You see so many companies that are doing this work. But I think if you talk to people running for governor in New Jersey and Virginia, or if you talk to, folks that are freaked out in Pennsylvania and Maryland right now because of the PJM auction, and said to them, "What are the top 3 things we could do to drop your electricity bill by 20%?" They have no idea, right? And so one of my big challenges in this moment is just how much confusion there is in the marketplace. And it you can tell why, right? If you read the official Twitter feed of the energy department, it just says we need more natural gas. Yes, we need more natural gas. I'm not anti adding more natural gas, but that doesn't solve the transmission and distribution challenges that we have, right? And so I think one of the big challenges that we have right now is that people are just hand waving as if their hair is on fire, as opposed to providing good, sober research and analysis and saying, here are the component parts. Here are the things where we don't have a supply chain challenge. Here's where we can deploy at scale very quickly without having any negative consequences to the grid. And here are the things that are 90% cheaper than what we're doing now.
Feels like a mic drop moment a little bit. And, not to get political, but I'm gonna get political for a second. I am curious about how much of the news and the news that we include in our Energy Central newsletters and that we talk about in our Slack channels and all of that, how much of the news about the Trump administration is targeting another offshore wind project that's 80% complete and a couple weeks away from generating power, how much of those kinds of headlines is noise rather than signal when we're talking about solving this problem of a more tech enabled and tech forward grid, or ensuring that this what we have called the demand problem, that to your point is maybe a little bit more of a T&D problem. What is signal, what is noise, and is that rooted inherently in the fact that energy has become so politicized?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of noise just because there's a lot of cool stuff happening in our industry, right? And so I get it. Everybody wants to put a press release out, and so everybody wants attention. Killing the permits for no good reason on a project that's almost completed just to piss off people who live in Denmark seem dumb, right? Like we should not be pissing off people who want to invest in our country. So there's a signal there too, right? Like I don't want to piss off the Koreans by
Mhm.
like having ICE go into a battery manufacturing facility in Georgia, which is like Brian Kemp's big accomplishment. He went to Korea to close that deal, and he's not allowed to say anything because of politics right now. And I'm sure it sucks for him, right? When you think about the area that that manufacturing facility is in, it's an area that hasn't seen economic growth in 25 years, right? Same with Dalton, Georgia, where you've got the Q cells facilities. Same with, the places where, in Augusta, Georgia, they were going to have that Aspen Aerogels facility. And as soon as Trump came in and said, we don't like any of these things, they moved their plant to China, right? All of that sucks completely, right? And so, but right now, Wood Mackenzie just came out with a report saying that we now have 38 gigawatts of capacity enrolled in virtual power plant programs that the utilities are not using and not paying for, right? Because they don't know how to drop people's electricity costs. And they're on track to having 160 gigawatts of virtual power plants fully subscribed by 2030. That's earth shaking, right? That means 20% of our entire peak demand, which is what we predicted in the virtual power plant liftoff report, will be fully subscribed by 2030 to be able to drop electricity bills by 20%. But that's only possible if the utilities put in the software to do that, right? If they actually like have a contract with the homeowner and ask their permission, right? If you put in a battery, the utility has to say, "Hey, can I pay you to lower your neighbor's bills?" And right now in most places across the country, that social contract is not clear. Frankly, the physical contract is not actually clear, right? And so that is the biggest signal that we want because President Trump has said very clearly in his executive order that he wants a 50% reduction in electricity bills, right? That is in the big order that came out in the first week he was in office. So if you want to honor that executive order, there's only one choice, right? It's demand flexibility and then obviously paired with grid enhancing technologies to get more out of the grid that we've already paid for, right? That is the only thing that we can deploy in less than 18 months and less than 2 years and do it at 90% cheaper. Everything else we still have to do. Don't get me wrong, like we still have to build new generation. We still have to build more transmission lines, which to still do all that stuff. But all of that other stuff is noise if what you care about in your North Star is affordability for ratepayers.
And that affordability is consistently time and again what utility leaders wanna talk about and what their customers are interested in talking about. So if we know that there is a path to solving this problem as you have laid out here, what is stopping the decision makers at these utilities that, we're speaking to today, who are listening today? What is stopping them from tapping into that version of reality instead of this one where we're, like you said, running around waving our hands with our hair on fire? What is the biggest hiccup? What is the biggest roadblock to get to that point from the perspective of a utility leader?
I mean, this is deeply uncomfortable for utility leaders, right? Remember that, like, on this side, right, as that utility leader was coming up the ranks through the electric utility before they became CEO, right? They were told spend as much money as possible because that's how we make money. Like, don't take the cheap option, take the expensive option because that's how we make money. We make money by deploying money, right? So, utility budgets went from $20 billion a year in 2003 to $178 billion last year. And so that's a lot of money, right? And now Wall Street's saying, wait a second, you can't spend that much money. Rates are going up too fast and you're losing your social license. So now do the cheap stuff, right? And so now all the CEOs and CFOs that I've talked to in the entire country is like, we want to do VPPs and grid enhancing technologies, right? Now
Mhm.
their middle management's like, wait, what? I haven't read a memo that you sent for 12 years. And every memo you sent before that said that we needed to pick the more expensive thing over the cheaper thing. And so they're fighting their CEOs and CFOs. So now you've got a culture clash within the utility where the old guard is saying, "No, I think that stuff's fragile. I don't think that stuff's going to work." They don't understand that we're still working in COBOL in our like tech systems, right? So we can't do that. And so now you got to fight within the utility. Got it? Then you go to the regulator, and the regulator says, "Yeah, we definitely want to pilot all this stuff." And the utility is saying, "No, no, no, I'm not piloting it. I want a full rollout of this stuff," right? And the regulator was like, "Wait, what? I don't have permission to do a full rollout of this stuff," right? Look no further than Maryland, right? Maryland has some of the smartest public service commissioners that I have ever met, right? And when you talk to them, they're like, Jigger, I don't have permission to approve all these programs. And so we had to pass a law in the legislature in Maryland saying that they could pay to expand the EV, charging flexibility program from pilot program to a full rollout. But we had to pass a law because the regulator didn't think that they had permission to approve that program, right? And so when you think about how screwed up we are right now, the electric utilities are like, I'm not used to running a grassroots campaign against my own regulator. But that's what we need to do. We need a media and communications campaign that says this is the cheapest way of doing things. You and I have been working on that for 2.5 years, right? But the utility is sitting on the sidelines saying we're not going to like lobby anybody or tell anybody anything. Like people need to come to their own conclusion on this, right? So that's point number one. Point number 2, you need a grassroots campaign. A whole bunch of people need to, like, sit in public service commissions going like, "Yeah, I would love to sign up to a demand flexibility program and take 20% discount on my bill." But that's not, like, coming through, right? Point number 3 is then you need to talk to the unions, who for a long time basically said, "We're anti-DG and VPPs because that's not union work." But you know what? The IBW and the union workers that work for the electric utilities have all switched sides. They're like, affordability. We want affordability. So all the unions are on board, but they haven't written an official memo to the utilities saying that they're on board, right? Consumer groups, if you talk to consumer groups and say, what are the top ways of doing this? They're not saying VPPs. Like, so if you talk to consumer advocates, et cetera, and then the last piece are politicians. Like if you talk to governors, like if you talk to Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, he's saying, I'm going to wrestle the PJM to the ground and I'm going to like get them to put this like new rules in place. But he's not saying, oh, basically the best way to do this is to flood the zone with 5,000 megawatts worth of new demand flexibility into FERC Order 2222 under the PJM. And so when the capacity auction happens in December, we need to flood it with demand flexibility so that way we can get lower auction prices. Like he's not saying that at all. And his legislature is not saying that at all. So clearly they don't know, right? And so now you're the utility company and you're like, wait, am I supposed to be driving this process? That's a very uncomfortable place for them.
Yeah, and it seems like there's, 47 tails wagging 47 different dogs, a lot of different interests and priorities and who's on first. It's complicated. I imagine a lot of it is complicated. And so I'm curious if all of that being what it is, right? That reality of complications and uncertainties and regulatory headaches and misplaced priorities, can all of that coexist in this idea of energy abundance? You're an abundance guy. I think it's in your Twitter profile, right? Can all of that coexist? Is there a way we can navigate through the muck to that future of abundance?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, I mean, you and I both know that there's no other choice. And so we are going to win the AI race. We are going to have electric vehicles. We are going to continue to install heat pumps. We're going to continue to onshore and reshore manufacturing in our country. And all of that needs electricity. So I'm pretty sure that I have not met a single utility CEO and CFO who has said, I'm going to fail my governor. Right. And so they want all that economic development. They want to make this happen, but they also have to stop pissing off their consumers, right? You can't just have 10% rate increases every year and go, it's not my fault, right? Because at some point, the governors lose their job, right? Which is what's happening. I was talking to one of the big Republican party leaders in Virginia because they've got the governor's race. And he was saying, Jigger, I have never seen more energy questions than I see right now in all of our primary conversations. Like usually energy is like number 18 on the list of issues. It is number 1 on everyone's list right now. And everyone is anti data centers because they think that's how we're going to solve this thing. And then meanwhile,
Especially in Virginia.
especially in Virginia. Meanwhile, like Governor Youngkin is pro data centers. He's like, I want as many data centers as possible. I want to win the AI race and I want all those property taxes to be paid in Virginia. Right. And so clearly, no one is explaining it to the voter. No one is explaining exactly how to get from here to there. And so, because of that, we have this golden opportunity, right? Where right now, most of the politicians, both Republican and Democrat, to be clear, I'm not taking sides here, they both are saying we're taking it from all sides. Everyone hates us right now, and everyone wants to know our plan for how to reduce electricity rates. And the only plan we have is getting more out of the infrastructure we've already paid for. Everything else is a 10% rate increase. We have an opening to solve this problem.
So where does funding, whether through the LPO, through venture, through your more entrepreneurial side of your work, where does funding fit into solving that? How do we figure out where to send the money to ensure that these problems get solved expeditiously?
So we have 8 utility companies who have applied for loans from the Loan Programs Office that got conditional commitments, right? Who are asked for that money to deploy grid enhancing technologies and VPPs, right? And get technical assistance from DOE laboratories and DOE employees to help with that rollout that are still pending in front of the loan programs office. So that they're conditionally committed and now they have to get approved, right? And they have to get closed, right? And so those utilities are waiting for, like a set of like, flags or something, some signal that like that loan programs office wants to close those loans, right? So that would be helpful. Um, but separately, we had, 4 virtual power plant applications that have yet to be closed, that we provided conditional commitments to, like Zoom and Nostromo and some of those other folks, that the administration could close if they wanted to, really reduce people's electricity bills. So I think that's on the LPO side. But I think on the other side, what you're finding is that a lot of electric utility companies are faced with a real challenge, right? Because one of the things that they worry about is if a whole bunch of people use net metering and use other tools to take revenue away from the utility, then that's like, not a great look in this particular moment. And so what you're seeing is a lot of utilities start to proactively say, we'll own the battery in your home, right? And so that's what like, Excel Minnesota is doing with Spark Fund, right? They're building some more centralized batteries at distribution centers where they're going to try to rate base it. But in some cases, the commercial industrial customer is going to put it on their property. They're going to own it and Excel Minnesota will just pay them for the services, right? You're starting to see that with Baltimore Gas and Electric. You're starting to see Southern Company pull that out, right? You're starting to see others doing the same thing, right? So in those cases, you're starting to keep the revenue in the utility system, right? And that's good news for everybody because most people don't want to like finance these projects with a loan and do all that other stuff. They'd rather the utility say, pay me $500 down. We'll stick something in your garage. It'll be $15 a month. And then, we'll just own it for 20 years and we'll dispatch it when we need to dispatch it to make your neighbor's bills cheaper. Right. And so a lot of utility companies are going like, well, I have the ability to do that, but I haven't done it before. and, and I don't know whether I'm comfortable doing that or not. But, like I think we're in this moment where you have this enormous crisis on our doorstep and, the way in which the electric utilities manage this crisis, there'll be books written about this.
Mike Smith, who is also another host of an Energy Central podcast, recently put it as that utilities are all want to be the first to be second. And that idea has really stuck with me. You can't just want to be the first to be second. Someone's got to go first, right? Someone's got to put their something on the
So
line.
the way that I've heard it is the utilities operate at the speed of jealousy. Um, but the good thing is that we published 75 case studies in the VPP liftoff update that we published in January of 2025. And those are all the people that did go first, right? Holy Cross Energy has already gone first. Rocky Mountain Power in Utah has already gone first. National Grid has already gone first, right? There's a bunch of people who've already gone first that they can actually copy. So, I mean, the good thing about the situation that we're in is that Georgia Power has already signed a contract with Line Vision to deploy dynamic line ratings throughout the entire, territory for Georgia Power.
Yeah.
So I don't think that anyone has to go first anymore. I think people have gone first, and now we're actually looking to sign people up for second, third, and fourth. And so I think we're there, right? I just think that there's a lot of people in the utility space who want to be pushed to do the right thing. They don't necessarily want to lead on their own. And I think what we're saying to them right now is that if you don't lead on your own right now, you are going to get blamed. You're going to get
Hmm.
blamed by governors. You're going to get blamed by the president of the United States. Right. And
Yeah.
that sucks. You don't want to be in that situation. So show leadership now, because I think it's like T minus 30 days before you start to get blamed. So this is the
Yeah.
moment to actually, do the right thing and take credit for the leadership.
Yeah. And there's your sense of urgency, everybody listening to this. Thank you so much for participating today. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Power Perspectives. Jigger is, as I'm sure you now agree, a total legend and a really, really smart person. I'm grateful for his time, honest insight, and hot takes. Batteries, 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 huh? Thank you as well to all of you for listening to this episode, the first with me as your new host. I am so excited about this opportunity, and I really do hope that you will share feedback with me anytime. My email is in the show notes. Please use it. Now, we will be back later in the week with another top-notch interview about the Utility Balancing Act. And next Tuesday, we've got a super data-driven, really impactful conversation about decarb with the one, the only, Nat Bullard. So subscribe where you are listening or watching to ensure you don't miss a single episode. It is all happening here on Energy Central's Power Perspectives. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.